Welcome to this peer learning session on innovative approaches to the National Environmental Policy Act. I am Karen Dabari at the National Forest Foundation, and we are using webcams today, so hopefully the technology will work for everybody. I'm hoping that you can all hear me. If a couple of you could type yes in the web chat, that would confirm it. I would appreciate that. Terrific. Great. Well, today's peer learning session is sponsored by the Forest Service's CFLRP program, the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, and this is one of a series of sessions. We'll be having a few more coming up in the future months, so hope you can join us. This is a great lineup of speakers today about NEPA. I know everybody is dealing with NEPA issues, and so it'll be a great opportunity to hear about some creative approaches. So today I'm going to run through a little orientation to this web room, and then we'll hear from John Crockett, a few announcements from the Washington office about the CFLRP program, and then we'll move right into our presentations. And we do hope that you will be active in asking questions and joining the conversation today. So everybody's on mute right now. That's because we have a lot of people on the line, and we just want to keep down background noise. There is a way to unmute your phone, and we'll let you know how to do that when we get to discussion points. You also can use the web chat, which I see many of you have already started introducing yourselves. Thank you very much. The web chat's a great place to ask questions, to type comments, to share links that you think might be helpful to other people. So just use that throughout the session. We may, if people are presenting and you type in questions there, that's a really good flag for us to know to come circle back and make sure we get those questions answered. The other thing is at the top of your screen there's a little icon with a person raising their hand, and if you could test that out by raising your hand, going up to that icon and clicking on it, great. You'll see that it pops your name to the top of the participant list, and then we know to call on you. And then after you've spoken, you can just go right back there and clear status or lower your hand, and then we know that you're off the list. So speaking of the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the video camera where our speakers will be appearing. Right below that is the attendee list, and you can use the scroll bar because it is a pretty small box. Use that scroll bar to go up and down and see who of your colleagues are on the line. Then down below that is the web chat, obviously. And to the left is the large box is the presentation screen. You can make that presentation screen full screen if you want by hitting, there's a little icon with 4 arrows pointing into corners at the top of your, at the top of that presentation screen. So let's see, one last thing is that if you are listening through your computer, or if you're listening on your phone and you're hearing an echo, it's likely because your speaker is on your computer. So if you just turn that off, that should reduce the feedback that you're getting. And last, the session's being recorded, and we do appreciate you at the very end filling out a 7-question, super short, anonymous online feedback form, and that helps us inform future sessions moving forward. Okay, I wanted to let you know that we do have a session coming up towards the end of June about monitoring plans and the ecological indicator that's specific to the CFLRP program reporting, and we hope you can join us for that. I know that's on a lot of people's minds given that reporting is always just around the corner and the 5-year report to Congress is coming up. And speaking of national reporting, I now want to introduce John Crockett, the National Restoration Planning Group leader for the Forest Service, who's going to make a few announcements about the CFLR program.
Hi, thanks, Karen. Just want to first start off by saying thanks for all the work that you guys do for hosting these webinars. Definitely a wealth of knowledge that can be gained and shared as a result of doing this. So what we'd like to do, since we have a captive audience of people who are interested in all things CFLR, is like to take a couple of minutes just to talk about some of the things that are going on. Karen mentioned the 5-year report to Congress. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the CFLR site visits that we're doing. And those site visits are a direct, will be utilized to be able to populate the 5-year report to Congress, which I'll talk about. So what we have been doing, we started in the summer of last year, trying to go out and visit projects on the ground, take a Washington office team of people and hear perspectives from the ground, talk about where they're having successes as well as being able to talk about where they're having challenges. And so last year we visited 4 projects in 2 regions, which were in regions 1 and region 6, and this year we plan to visit a total of 8 projects to finish out the rest of the regions. So all of the regions will be visited and as part of the process. So we'll finish up this summer. We visited Region 3 last week. We've got Region 4 coming up in a couple of weeks, and regions 5, 8, and 9 in July, towards the end of July. And so these site visits are designed to be able to engage with the projects and the stakeholders. We get a lot of information through our reporting systems and through monthly phone calls, but there's nothing like going out and having a face-to-face conversation and talking about what's really going on the ground. So, and they've been helpful in both directions so far. And so the way we're using that information is we're doing kind of a national level report for all the projects where all the visits where we look at themes, not necessarily calling out one project, but what are the themes that are going on within the program, and we talk about that at a national perspective. So there is the report for that is on our website if you want to see it from last year, and we'll have a similar thing that we'll do this year with our site visits. And so we're also going to be able to use that information to go into the 5-year report to Congress, which is a good segue into the report itself. And so as far as what we're looking for on the timeline, let me back up and say the legislation requires us to, at the midpoint of the act, to talk about, tell Congress how's this program going. They authorized it, gave us some good legislation, and we have to give them some feedback as to how things are going. So that's part of what we look to do with the report. And so Lauren Marshall has done a great job of mocking up a skeleton report. And what we did was we looked at the things that we wanted to have as part of that the outline for the report. Started with a small group and have been on a pretty consistent basis trying to branch out and make that group larger to get feedback. So far we've started on staff and forest management with what that mock-up would look like, and then expanded that to other staffs within the Washington office, and ran it by the group that put a lot of thought into the ecological indicator, got perspectives from them, and starting to share it with the rest of the projects. And then from there, we're going to go out to the CFLR Coalition and our stakeholders and allow them to be able to continue to add to it, and constantly getting feedback throughout that whole process. And so that's kind of the structure of how we look to pull that together. And so I'll just talk a little bit real quick to wrap this up, to talk about what's going to be in the actual report itself. So we'll start out talking about the act itself and go into program oversight. What we're learning from these site visits that we're doing, and then another one of the the themes or titles within the documents document is building community relationships. So we'll be able to hear from our partners and have some testimony on collaboration from our partners, as well as look at the survey results from collaboration. And then we go into encouraging economic stability. So we'll have graphs and pictures and stories about job creation and total labor income that comes from that. And there's an ecosystem services component of it as well, and they'll have stories and pictures and graphs, maybe something related to Forest to Faucets about ecosystem services. And then we talk about funding. You know, what are we doing with the partner contributions as well as the leverage funds, and of course there will be stories and graphs and pictures related to that. One of the requirements of the act was, you know, how are we reducing wildfire management costs? So we'll have a description of the RCAT process and the information that we're gathering from the partners who are, or the projects who are pulling together the RCAT report. So a lot of information on that. And then a whole series on ecological restoration. And so where we'll talk about invasive species, fire regime, wildlife habitat, and watershed. And all of those will have stories and graphs and pictures to depict what we're doing. So that's the structure of the report itself. You know, we're probably looking at about 12 pages or so with plenty of pictures and reading that goes with that. And that's something that we'll be looking to get feedback on from a wider audience here shortly. Lastly, let me say that Lauren Marshall is on the call, as well as Tanya Ellersick. Tanya is a Presidential Management Fellow on staff here on the Forest Management staff. Both Lauren and I will have to jump off early. Won't be able to stay on for the full call, but Tanya will be on. So if there's something that needs to be followed up with the Washington office as a result of today's webinar, she'll be available to assist with that. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. We are about to move into our presentations now, but before we do that, I wanted to ask you all to fill out a couple of polls. You should see that one on your screen. And then this one, so what is your affiliate, whoops, sorry, one disappeared. What is your affiliation? And then we'll get that other one back up. While you're filling that out, I'm pulling this other one up. Okay, there we go. That's the wrong one. Okay, so you should see it looks good. We've got representation from a lot of Forest Service folks at different levels. Looks like some private industry, university research, and nonprofit partners out there, as well as some state and local government and tribal representation. So that's nice to see a good broad representation here today. And we've got lots of CFLRP representation from the two different cohorts, 2010 and 2012, as well as many other non-CFLRP landscape restoration efforts. So good. Okay, so I will move these over, and we will now go to our first, let's see, I'll show you our list. Oh, I wanted to mention to you that there is a tool out there. There's many NEPA support tools. I just want to make sure you'd heard about this one that the National Forest Foundation recently developed. It's a roadmap for collaboration before, during, and after the NEPA process. And in the follow-up email that I'll send to all of you, I will include a link to where you can find this document. It's really an online tool, very interactive. So hopefully that will be useful to you. And also I would invite you, if you have helpful NEPA tools that you'd like to share with the group today, put those in the web chat, and then I will send those out to everybody in the follow-up. Okay, so our speakers today are Katie Van Alstyne with the Black Hills Mountain Pine Beetle Response Project. Many of you have probably heard, I've been hearing about the Black Hills and what they've been doing for a while now, so I'm really looking forward to this presentation to hear about their, what they call their PBR project. Then Sarah Maven is going to present about adaptive and iterative NEPA on the Colorado Front Range, and Mike Picard is also there, going to be there with her to help answer questions. And then finally we will hear from Mike North, who's with Teams, about the A to Z Mill Creek Stewardship Project. And Kathleen Ward, who's on the forest, is also available to help handle questions and further expand upon that project. So moving right into that, we will go to the Black Hills presentation. Katie, you have presenter status, so you can unmute your phone and then start your webcam.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Fantastic.
Woohoo! And the slide thing is just starting for me.
Okay, so if you'd like me to change your slides, Katie, maybe that would work better.
I think it's going to work. We'll give it a shot, and apologize for some of the technical difficulties. The whole Black Hills network apparently is down, so I'm on a backup of a backup. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie Van Alstyne, been the team leader for the Mountain Pine Beetle Response Project here on the Black Hills for the last couple of years. And to get some history on this project and kind of the big why of why we did this when we had a pretty effective NEPA machine doing large-scale projects. It's the expansion of the mountain pine beetle, like much of the West, for the last 16 years has been at epidemic levels, and it's been spreading faster than our collective capacity, both internal with the Forest Service, our partners in industry, and also working with the different states and counties. We looked at what our research and experience showed us and what we know works. And it was the opportunity to work with the public, internally with some of our specialists, the county, states, and congressional delegations. In the Black Hills, which is the western part of South Dakota and northeastern part of Wyoming, we really didn't just wake up one day and go, oh, look, there's an epidemic out there. For the last 15 years, the 4 districts have been very involved in landscape projects of 25 to 30,000 acres in size. And doing the traditional NEPA, you identify an area on the landscape, you do all the specialist surveys for wildlife, botany, etc., and then you do the analysis, and then you come up with a decision, and then you implement. And over the last 10, 15 years, about 264,000 acres have been treated. And most of the purpose and need for those projects have been dealing with the mountain pine beetle and also the fire hazard and trying to reduce both. For the pine beetle project, the ID team consisted of specialists from the supervisor's office. That way we were trying not to impact the district specialists, and they could continue with some of their projects that were already ongoing. And we had many discussions with the Council on Environmental Quality, Environmental Protection Agency, and folks from our Washington office. And just a heads up, I lost it, but it came back. For this project, we decided to use the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, the title for insect and disease. And the focus of the purpose and need was very narrow. It was to reduce the mountain pine beetle susceptible ability of the habitat with the trees, and also reduce the fire hazard. We know what methods work, and we knew that we wanted to build flexibility into this project. And to build some of that flexibility, we stretched our comfort zone and brought in more of an adaptive management approach. And this had a lot of team discussions on how to work with the adaptive approach. How does it really work? Is it a true adaptive area? And part of that stretching of our growth was not all the answers come in alignment. You may not have the answer to A, but you'll have the answer to F. And working our way through this and identifying what stands were at high risk and work through kind of a flow matrix, this evolved throughout the project. And really right before the draft was released in May of 2012, did we kind of feel more confident with this matrix and adaptive management. Again, we went back to the strengths of what we knew, working with our own internal experience with what's out there on the ground, also forest health, and the various research that's been ongoing on the mountain pine beetle. Also worked with our partners at the state and county levels also. For the adaptive management, we have evaluation points. They're not triggers per se, but it's when you may start or stop an activity, or when to proceed more or change things up. Through the decision, we have a mid-year report that's given to our National Forest Advisory Board, and then an annual report that will come out in November. And we did have our first annual report last November, which I'll cover in just a second. This project began August of 2011 with our scoping, and we had a record of decision December 10th, 2012. And development of the field guides was the first thing that the team tackled right after the decision. And this is where it's similar to a traditional NEPA, but you add the adaptive management component to it. And that we have, as Horst from CEQ stated, this is a one-and-done project. You have the NEPA done, and we can be more flexible on the ground to be at the right place at the right time with using these field guides to go in with the specialist just to double check to make sure that we're consistent with that decision. Implementation began in February of 2013, and we'll be working on this for the next 5 to 7 years. The monitoring report, which is a key aspect to an adaptive project, provides an overview of the implementation and the effectiveness of what we've been doing, and also making sure that we are consistent with the decision. It's intended to be flexible, and it may change as we learn from new research, because research is never, finished. It's always an ongoing thing. We're learning from the techniques that we're applying on the ground. And last year, fiscal year 13, we had one activity that was actually completed within the fiscal year. We had 8 activities initiated, but to be on the fiscal year of reporting, that activity was a cut and chunk. And we've learned a lot from that and how to apply it as a holding agent across a large landscape. And then 2 resource areas, hydrology and wildlife, identified some areas that needed to adapt to make the treatments more effective on the ground, and also make it easier for the folks that are actually implementing on the ground, just clarifying the intent of what the analysis was, and it's still consistent with what we did through the EIS and the record of decision. What have we learned through this project? Again, the collaboration piece and leveraging all that did not begin with this project. It was an ongoing from what the districts began. And it was kind of the perfect storm for this project to look at a larger landscape, to be more effective across the landscape, to be at the right place at the right time. Working with our partners in forest health and research, it's also a springboard for further learning and innovation. By that, it's the platform for now we're looking at a fire assessment across the landscape and using some of these same techniques that we learned through PBR on where to invest our efforts on the ground. And that investment is not only internally with the Forest Service, but also externally with our partners, because we're all realizing that we don't have the capacity to be everywhere and treat everything that we want to. There's got to be some priorities that come out to some areas, and this has been a platform to help us and help our partners understand. The public has been behind us on this. They're eager to learn and work with us, and we're the same way. We're learning from them also. So that is kind of the pine beetle response in a nutshell. And if you have questions, let me know. I think the webcam went down.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Well, we do have a question already. How did you approach typical quantitative analyses? And I should just say before you answer, we are going to take a few clarifying questions right now and after each presentation, and then the plan is to have some time at the end for more Q&A. So go ahead, Katie.
Okay. So if I heard that question correctly, is how did we deal with collecting the data, or did we have all the data? I'm not positive. But we went back to what we did know. And we identified all the high-risk stands on the forest that were susceptible to mountain pine beetles. For us, they came down to 4 structural stages, 4B, 4C, 3B, and 3C. So that way we identified the areas at high risk, and those would be the potential treatment areas. The project area is the forest boundary. So we didn't have all the surveys done, but we also realized that the max disturbance that we would be putting on the ground would be a commercial harvest. So you analyze to that aspect, and using experience and research from the past, you cover what we do know and tell that story.
Great, thank you. And Kristen, if you want to unmute your phone by hitting star and pound, then if there was any follow-up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Kristen. Yeah, so I'm an economist working on a similar adaptive management approach, and we're just having difficulty coming up with estimates for such things like timber volume harvested and other typical quantitative things that we would analyze, because with the adaptive management approach, it's not always it might be a range of numbers. We might not even know the range. So I was just curious how you specifically approached those issues in your analysis.
Through our forest plan, it's a very progressive plan that we did with the phase 2, and our silviculturists look at the habitat that go for different critters and stuff based on the structural stages. And we also have what is called a Project X worksheet. And I understand, but I can't go into all the nits and crannies of the details on how the silviculturists and the wildlife biologists work together to come up with some of the numbers that you're asking about. Some of it's going to be in general that if you have the mountain pine beetle continue like an alternative A and you have no action, some species are going to do better than others. So it's more of a qualitative description versus what's going to happen with treatments, that if we treat the area, you're going to retain some of that habitat. So you may not have the hard and fast numbers, but you can qualitatively describe and tell that story based on what you do know on commercial harvest. And if you're looking at volumes and such, silviculturists have that prescription and can generally state across an area or acres what that volume may be. Now on the ground with the field guides, that's where it's fine-tuned a little bit as we go into the sale preps if we're doing a timber sale.
Great, thanks, Katie. So we have two more questions, one from Phil Chang. Can you explain a little more about the checkpoints in the process, the ability to adaptively change direction, what information would make you change direction, and what the thresholds are? So that's a lot of questions in one, but maybe if you could just give us a kind of a big picture answer.
For example, I'll use the one on cut and chunk. It was a new process that kind of came up through some of our partners and also working with Forest Health, the entomologist, of going out to the woods and cutting and chunking bug-hit trees. And the idea is if you cut the tree down, cut and chunk it up, it dries out faster, therefore it kills the growth inside the tree. At first we weren't sure what the time limits were, when do you start and stop on that, and through going back and monitoring that activity, the cutout date is now, I believe, March. And when it first started, we were going into May and April, or April-May, and realized that we weren't having the success rate that we wanted. So one way of using that monitoring is going back, looking, and going, okay, we've got to change the endpoint on this. And it's about 75% effective, which for Forest Health is acceptable. Then we also learned on what scale do you use this cut and chunk. And the smaller the patch of the bug hit is, the more effective it is. Instead of from doing, 30 acres of cut and chunk, they're finding that it's better if you use a smaller area, 5 to 10 acres. And a lot of the public was on board with doing this until they actually had to go out on the landscape and figured out how much work it really was. So that's also a start and stop on some of that. So when you look at the evaluation points for the timber sales, the cut and chunk, some of the other activities that we could potentially use, it's more of us to think, the start, the stop, as we go through, look at the effectiveness of each treatment. Do we need to change it? Is it giving the results on the ground that we were anticipating? And it's that iterative, adaptive loop of, plan, implement, monitor, adapt. So I tried to hit all of these questions at one shebang.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And one last question from Wendy Green. Did the project include treatments other than vegetation, such as roads and watershed condition?
With HFRA, we did not do a lot on the road side. It's only if it's a haul route, because HFRA is pretty limited in that. On the side, the Black Hills did just finish their travel management plan, and that deals with a lot of the roads, etc. But if we were using a road for a haul route, obviously we would keep it to the minimal standard or the standard of what the road needed for either the timber sale operation. Some of the lesser activities for cut and chunk, most likely you're not using the road, so it mainly applies if it was a timber sale.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie, and we will come back for more questions at the end. Excellent. Okay, so we will move on now to Sarah Maben, who is the Renewable Resource Staff Officer on the Pike San Isabel, and Mike Picard is there with her as well, who's the Environmental Coordinator. And so Sarah, you can go ahead and start your webcam when you're ready and just hit star and then pound to unmute your phone. And while you're doing that, I will bring up, we wanted to ask another poll question of the group, and that is about your experiences with adaptive and iterative NEPA. So if you all could respond to whether you've heard of adaptive or iterative NEPA, whether you've used it or whether you've not heard of it before, just to get a sense of where people are. Great. Well, it looks like we've got people in every single category, a few who've used adaptive NEPA and a few who've used iterative NEPA, many who've heard of both, and also a good amount of people who haven't heard of either. So interesting. Thank you. Okay, well, I think we can hear you, Sarah and Mike.
Okay.
But we don't see you yet.
You don't see us? Start sharing. There we go.
There you are. Excellent.
Okay, cool. All right, so Mike Picard and I are going to present on an adaptive and an iterative NEPA process for the Upper Monument Creek project. And this is part of the Front Range CFLRP. So the Upper Monument, can you shut that door? Yep. The Upper Monument Creek project is a 67,000 acre landscape on the southern end of the Front Range CFLRP. About a year and a half ago, maybe closer to 2 years ago, a collaborative group came together to work through some desired conditions, management actions, and monitoring specific to this landscape, and then present those recommendations to the district ranger. And this report, I've sent the link to the report from the group. I've sent that to Karen so she can email that out. But this report is the results of that effort, and it does describe desired conditions for this landscape based on veg types, management actions, and then monitoring, as well as a desire to have adaptive, both adaptive NEPA and then continued collaboration. So the collaborative identified through this process several uncertainties related to desired conditions specific to some of the veg types. So they recommended this collaborative involvement during implementation and adaptive management so that information learned through monitoring and research could be used to inform future management actions, basically the collective learning through doing. The adaptive NEPA starts with adaptive management and then assesses those adaptations during the analysis process. So adaptive management, we identified the desired conditions, the management options to achieve that desired condition, monitoring to assess whether or not the desired condition is being achieved, and then some kind of timetable or touch points to know if desired conditions are being achieved at the desired rate. That was the other piece of it. The adaptive management can be based on if-then statements. Some people call these triggers. Some of them, to me, are kind of hard and fast, but the management action, once it's taken to move the area towards the desired condition, the monitoring occurs. So if monitoring or research, in our case as well, identifies desired conditions have either not been achieved, aren't being achieved fast enough, or are different than what was previously identified, aka we find out new information through research, then we would take a different management action. So examples from Upper Monument Creek. Research indicates that Upper Monument Creek needs to have larger openings across the landscape. Currently, most of our NEPA is limited to 2.5 acres, but we know we need larger openings up to 10 acres. Now, the trigger for this is if social monitoring indicates that there's general acceptance of 5-acre openings, then maybe we would increase the size of the openings to 7 acres, and then we would reassess the social acceptance, and then we would increase them up to, 10 acres. That to me isn't necessarily a hard trigger, but it is something that through continued collaborative process that will be part of this environmental impact statement that we can assess. We know the science is there, but we don't have social acceptance for the large openings yet. Another example is desired condition is to minimize the impact of treatments on the spread of noxious weeds. So we implement our current mitigation, such as washing equipment prior to it entering the national forest. But if monitoring indicates that noxious weeds continue to spread as a result of treatments, then we would survey and treat noxious weeds in the project area prior to treatment implementation. Another example is the desired condition is we want more surface fire and passive crown fire. So if field behavior modeling indicates treatments aren't reducing the likelihood of active crown fire, which is prevalent in our landscape, then modify the placement of treatments across the landscape. And if prescribed fire implementation indicates treatments are not increasing surface fire and passive crown fire, then modify the actual treatments within the stands. So why is adaptive NEPA important? It gives the Forest Service, in this case, the flexibility to change project implementation within the scope of the analysis, but after the agency has made the decision. So our intent in this process is to use the if-then statements, identify and commit to monitoring, and then identify and assess the largest extent of all the characteristics that could be implemented in the project area. So if we think that openings should be up to 40 acres, we would assess the 40 acres even though where we're starting is probably something much less than that. We know that across this landscape, the vegetation types that we're treating, we have done a mapping exercise that has identified the veg types that we want to treat and the types of treatments we want to occur within those, but it's a mapping exercise. And so when we get out into the field, there may be adjustments that we need to make. So we have identified the maximum treatment footprint that would occur across this landscape of 25,000 acres. We're in the process of doing that same kind of assessment right now for prescribed fire, which will be another piece of this project. So we have treatment locations. Again, it's based on existing veg conditions, access slope, not on map polygons. So our treatment, we're going to produce a map for the public to look at, but it's based on on-the-ground conditions instead of a hard and fast treatment polygon. We're going to assess every acre for the project for the most impactful treatments or combinations of treatments, such as mechanized or ground-based logging with broadcast burning after the fact. And then like up to 25,000 acres of mechanized treatments, even though we will likely only be able to treat 15 to 20,000 acres given our current budget over the life of that NEPA. Prescribed fire, again, assess every acre for collaborative involvement during implementation.
The road, so it mainly applies if it was a timber sale.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie, and we will come back for more questions at the end. Excellent. Okay, so we will move on now to Sarah Maben, who is the Renewable Resource Staff Officer on the Pike San Isabel, and